Hello and welcome to this video. And in this video I want to talk about the lightning in the viewport of Houdini. So here in Houdini I have some geometry, so I made this rock. And I want to talk about the lightning or a light setup to have some nicer viewport or presentation in Houdini here. So again, this is for viewport only, so I'm only going to do things and settings in the viewport. So I'm not going to like render out like in Karma or Renderman. I'm not going to go there. I'm just going to purely talk about having a nicer look in our real-time viewport we have here. So placing down light and making sure it looks a bit nicer. I often get questions about this, so I want to make a video covering a few things here and there. So this will also be very beginner friendly, and I will show you where all the settings are and how you can find certain things. So let's get started. So in here I have my rock geometry. You can also just grab one of the test geometries we have in Houdini. So as you can see, you can grab one of the rubber toy here, but I'm gonna use my rock I made previously. There are also tutorials about this rock, so you can check out other videos here and learn how to build this as well. So the first thing to do is, of course, I want to add a light. So I'm just gonna press tab here and type in lights. So here we have my geometry node and I have a light node here. This is a basic light, and we're gonna grab here my handle and just let's move this upwards. So as you can see, it is now casting a light from up here, and we have like this really dark shadow. Now, one other thing I want to do here as well is on the sidebar here of Houdini, we actually have different light modes. So if you have not played with them, we have these are quite interesting. So this is just basically disabling all lights. These are some basic lights, the normal light, and these are the high quality ones. So we actually want to enable the high quality lighting mode. So make sure we are enabled. So you will see that there is some difference in mainly like the shadowing. So this is actually more casting a shadow, and this is not really having any shadow. So here enabling high quality. Now furthermore, in our lights, I'm not going to go over every setting. I'm just going to show you the interesting ones, which is of course here our color. So let's say we want to make this a bit more bluish. We can bring this here to blue, and we can boost the value here with some intensity and exposure. So we can keep moving this around if you want to, like so. And you have some nice blue color there. Now further, there are definitely like, again, like more certain types and settings here, like you can do a spotlight. So if I enable this, you will have now a spotlight. So I will have to rotate this in the right direction to make sure it's like lightening that area. But I'm just going to keep it simple for now and just use a normal point light, which is just like casting from every direction from here. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about and is our shadows are like really dark. So normally, if you, for example, worked with game engines, you will also include some environment reflection maps. So the light is not really like bouncing here in our viewport. So it's not like we have any like global illumination here real time. So we're gonna add here a environment light. So place this here. So this is also a new node here. And you can see that we have now basically none of that like harsh shadows. So again, here we then have our color intensity, so very similar to the light mode, and we can like lower this down and, for example, make our shadows like less darker. Now let's reset this quickly, and let's go and scroll down here, and we have something here which is called a sky environment map. So we can actually enable certain sky environments, like this is one that is built in for you, and this is quite generic one, like it's just like these bluish tones, and you can play around with that as well. Like you can play around with like the angle of the sun, the sky color, some of the ground color here, so you can change these settings. But what we often want to do is plug in our own environment map or HDR. So if we disable this, we will here have a option to add our HDR map. So if this is enabled, this will be grayed out environment map. So make sure you disable this, and then we can fill in our own custom map. So one website I can recommend you to check out is HDRI Haven to have these environment maps. So you can see that there are a lot of different maps here. You can also go to the categories and have like different HDR maps. So definitely really interesting to get certain HDR maps. So as you can see now, I have loaded in one of the HDR maps I got from that website. And also my background is also now that HDR, so it's actually in that environment. So again, we can lower the intensity or increase this. So also the background color will change with that. So this is a great setup now for having this better, or also just like a nicer way of modeling. So your model looks a bit nicer. So this is some really basic things you could do to make your viewport already like a bit nicer. Now, also, let's talk a bit about the nodes themselves. So you can see here that they're also having these icons that you can toggle on or off. So you can see that the blue one is the render one or the display one here. So if we disable this, we will not see that guide or the position of the lights. So in some cases, I would just disable these. So it's not like bothering me if I'm just looking at my model. And also the green one is basically selectable. So if I would disable this, I can, for example, now select my rock. I can rotate my rock here, but I cannot select my light because the selectable here is off. So right now selectable is on, and with off, I'm not able to select this back again. So anyway, so often I would just disable both of these. So they're not really in my way when I'm just focusing on my model. So I can just move around and not bother about these lights or accidentally select the light, for example. So now with that base setup in mind, let's go and talk a bit more about certain settings. This is quite basic, and let's talk a bit about certain settings and features. Now, there are a few features we can easily access by right-clicking on our icon here. So you can see that we have a few things we can enable or disable. So here, if I would, for example, disable the specular, you can see that some of the shininess has been removed from my rock. So I actually like it in this case without any specular because I don't think I have any decent specular value. So I might just disable that. And also interesting here is, of course, our shadow. So we can have different shadow methods. I'm going to leave it like it is. And what I want to go to is actually the ambient occlusion, because that will help a lot. So you can see that it is a bit subtle, but you can definitely see that it is sort of like helping to make the model a bit more nicer. Now, furthermore, we then have, for example, like reflections or certain fog. So it will add a fog here. Or we can also do other things like depth of field and so on. So what is interesting about these is that every lighting mode has actually different settings. So of course the high quality one has the most settings because it will like calculate again like shadow, AO, reflection. So it will calculate more than, for example, if we don't have any lights, we don't need like options for shadow. So that's not there. Now there are some other settings you can change as well, and that is by going into the display settings. So to access this, we're going to press the D key on our keyboard. So just press D, and then here we have our menu with settings. So I'm mainly going to go over settings for our lighting. So let's immediately go to lights. And some of these are actually the same you would find on the right click here, like specular and AO, and some other values are actually also the same here. So here we have, for example, a slider for the AO or some more shadow options and so on. What can actually be interesting here is, for example, increasing the light sampling. So sometimes if you would look at your render, there might be some noisy parts in your model. So if I would increase this, it will actually get better. So in my case, it's not that noticeable. So if I would, for example, here in this area, we have like this quite noisy grunge here. And if I would then increase my light sampling, this will basically be gone. So in some cases, it might be interesting to increase that light sample quality to make it a bit more nicer. So if you look closely, this will only get calculated when I'm not moving around. So if I move around, it will sort of like still, you will still see some little noise there, but if I release my mouse, it will then have like that full quality there. Then let's also continue with more settings here. We can, for example, change our background. So we can go here to backgrounds. The first thing that I'm going to do is here this toggle can be used to enable or disable that background I used in my environment light. So I don't always want to see that color or that map, so we can just disable that. Then we can also here just use our normal color schemes to change that color. There are some more options here to plug in certain maps and colors. But let's say I want to add a quick color here in the background. And there are a few ways of doing that. Like you can just create a plane in the background or do something else. But the way that I would sometimes quickly do it is go to the fog and enable fog. And we can just, for example, set a color here. So maybe if you want to maybe go a bit to the bluish side, maybe make it a bit darker, like so. We can also, I would also recommend you increasing the density so it is closer to the color you pick. And then we have like a basic color here. So that is how I would quickly just set a background color. It's a little cheat or workaround, but it works nicely. So there are definitely other ways, but this is just like quickly adding that color. So now I've covered some of the main settings here that can be interesting for your viewport to make it a bit nicer. And let's say I want to quickly make a really nice screenshot of this. So I'm gonna, for example, make more lights. So we can add a rim light here. So rim. And let's of course enable back here these tabs here. So I can grab my light and we can just here place it in the back of my rock. And I'm gonna increase here the intensity a lot. So let's just crank that up and see when we are starting to see a rim light. So here we now have the rim light. So maybe this was a bit too much. So we can always like lower this. We can maybe make this like a red color. That could be cool. And we can just copy paste this and bring one to the other side here. Like so. Or maybe bring this down. So we're gonna make this a bit more cooler. Do some little lighting setup here. And we can just repeat this process by just copying lights. Like maybe we have one a rim at the top here. So again, when you have a lot of different lights, you can see them all appear here and they are selectable. So I'm gonna just disable this so they're not all visible and selectable. So I'm almost done, and next thing I want to do is actually fix the sort of like the shininess in there. So I actually don't have any material in here. So if I would enable or disable my material, this is all stored in the vertex color, what you see here. So this is not a texture, it's just like a vertex color. So the shininess is coming from the Houdini default material. So I'm going to go to display options. So D in the viewport, we can go to materials, and we can here play around with our roughness and our specular. So we can make this more or less glossy. So I'm going to go here and change that. So I don't think that this looks nice for a rock unless it's like water going through there or something like that. I'm just going to increase it like so. Then I'm happy with this, and I want to maybe do a quick sort of like almost a render or screenshot from this. So I can recommend you here is go to new camera. So when we do this, we're going to create a camera from the viewport. So let's set it here. And we can here, as you can see, play around with that angle. So what I want to do as well here is go to our viewport view, and I want to change the resolution to, for example, like a game size. So let's say like 512. Maybe change the field of view like so. And then we have here a basic layout here. So now I'm ready to sort of like grab a screenshot And in this case, what I have done for my rock is basically if I change the frame number, it will also change the visual. So you can see that every time I pick a different frame number, I will have a different rock. So now I want to capture this automatically. So every time I have a new frame, I want to automatically have a sort of like a screenshot or a quick render from this. So I can use a flipbook here. So I'm going to right click, make new flipbook. So here we have our flipbook, and we want to go to our output settings first, and we can set a certain frame range. So right now it's going to go from 0 to 40, which is quite a lot. For demonstration here, I'm only going to let's say 10 frames, because otherwise it will take a lot of time to calculate each frame. And also here under render, we're going to have to say beauty pass. So basically what will happen if we don't if we don't use the beauty pass, it will also capture some of the UI elements or even your handle. So beauty pass will filter out the UI elements here, because we are literally sort of like taking almost like a screen capture here. Then we can go here to effects. We can here set the higher quality for anti-aliasing. And we can also go here to size. And I can recommend you changing or choosing the same size or aspect ratio from your camera. So in this case, I'm going to go with a 1K texture. So once that is done, I can basically press start here, and it will start an automatic process of capturing each frame a different rock. So now, as you can see, we have like this special amp layer here. And we have then our rock and our 10 frames. So every single frame now is a different rock. And this is how we could quickly export or get these variations. So again, these are not like full high quality rendered out. So if you just quickly need to show off like a work in progress of your tool, I would often just use this to like show this, to show off your work here. So again, this is still in Houdini, so we want to, of course, export this. So we can here go to export and export this to a normal movie file. We can also export frames. So let's say that, for example, frame number 6 looks really cool, and this is basically what I want for my project. I can just go here and click save this frame only, so we're not saving out every single frame. And that was basically it for this tutorial. So I showed you how we can do a better or nicer setup in your Houdini viewport and take advantage of the high quality mode here. And you can also just use this to like model your work or generate procedural stuff. So it's always nice to make things already look a bit nicer in the viewport. Now, the last thing I want to show you is a quick tip. So here I'm in a scene, in a different scene, and I don't have any lights yet. So that means I would have to create my lights again. So I would have to create a normal light, some environment lights here to create a whole setup back again. So I can play around with the light, place it here on top, make this a bit more subtle, and so on. So I would have to keep adding these lights. I'm going to quickly place a few more lights. So when we have a setup like this, we can actually now sort of like save this or use this as a preset. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to open here my shelf tool. So you probably have this open anywhere. So, and we're going to make our own shelf tool. So we can go to this plus icon and we can basically make our own shelf tool. So we're going to click here on the new shelf tool and we're going to create our own shelf tool. So now we have this empty new bar. So as you can see, as in the other ones, we can basically place nodes in here or shortcuts to certain features in Houdini. So we can create our own one here. So I just called it tools for my tools, but we can also just select what we want to. So these lights. And we can drag them in here and release them in the bar. And it will ask us now to create a new shelf tool. So we're going to just give it a name and we're going to just call it base lights, for example, base lights 01 in case you want more presets. We can also give this a more proper labeling. So I might just copy paste that over here and I'm just going to press accept. So now I have base lights. So also the icon is just this gear, but you can also change this to something else if you want that. So, but with that in place, we can now delete all these lights. And every time I would click on this icon, it will add this light setup for us. So this way we can just quickly save out presets. And this works basically with everything in Houdini. So if I would, for example, make a certain node setup, I can just drag the nodes that I want. I can drag them in here and I can have that as a preset or a certain tool. So that's just a really cool way of saving interesting presets or nodes if you want to use that later on. We can also further go into editing our tool, and we can then edit this tool. We can add shortcuts to this tool. So every time I press a certain button, we will place the lights automatically and so on. So there is definitely a lot of different interesting things here for you. So this is just a quick trick. It's super useful if you often need like a really basic setup to like quickly make something more presentable, for example. And that was it for this video. So again, mainly talking about showing you how to use the light setup in the viewport, making some of your models look nicer in the viewport, and also like creating like quick work in progress shots to share with your team or on other platforms. So I hope you enjoyed this video and thank you for watching.